Welcome all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Curcuruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Connecting with Conservation, the only podcast that goes behind the scenes to look at the business of conservation in our country. I'm John Gassett with the Wildlife Management Institute. I'm your co-host with Connecting with Conservation. Here with my fellow co-host, Jim Curcuruto from Outdoor Stewards. How you doing today, Jim?
Doing great, thank you. And we're going to be able to talk about one of my favorite topics, bass fishing. And I know there's been a lot of talk about, the evolution of bass fishing, but man, I don't know if I'm lazy or just a creature of habit. Like I don't like changing lures. I either run a spinnerbait or a rubber worm, but it's beside the point on that. But today's guest gets to talk about the conservation of bass fishing, and he is actually the national conservation director of Bassmaster, Gene Gilliland. So, Gene, why don't you tell us a little bit about you personally, and then we'll get into the conservation of bass fishing.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation. As National Conservation Director, I have a number of different roles. My background, just to start out there, I was a fishery research biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation for 30 years and did a lot of work on black bass, whether it was Florida bass introductions. I worked a lot with bass tournaments. And did just a lot of bass management type research. And then 11 years ago now, I retired from that job and got on with B.A.S.S. as the National Conservation Director. I still live in Oklahoma. I did not move to Birmingham, Alabama, where Bass's headquarters is. But my job takes me all over the country for various tasks that I am responsible for. I represent B.A.S.S, the company B.A.S S, B-A-S-S, on a number of different boards and councils and committees that have to do a lot with fisheries policy at the federal level, and then working with a lot of our other conservation partners like the American Sport Fishing Association or the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, the Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council, a number of those types of organizations. And in some cases, I'm representing B.A.S S, the company, but in some, I'm also representing bass anglers, sort of on a broader scope. Another part of my job is internally working with our tournament staff. B.A.S S puts on 45 or so tournaments at the corporate level every year. And we have a staff of people that travel the country and set up the weigh-ins. And I work with all of those folks on primarily on fish care and how we keep the fish alive so we can return as many as we can to the lake after the tournament. Then the third aspect of my job is we have a network of state chapters. We call it the Bass Nation. And each of those state chapters has a volunteer who is the state conservation director. Most of those folks are just people that have a little more passion for the conservation side of things. They don't always have a lot of training in biology or policy, working with their state governments. So that's where I come in to help them kind of bridge that gap and help them with local and state projects and issues, and try to help build relationships within each state between the bass clubs and the state fish and game agencies.
Well, you got a lot going on for sure. But I want to, I've been a BASS member for a while, and I bet you a lot of our listeners and viewers are well aware of you, but if not, I sometimes get confused. You got Bass Nation, you got Bass Anglers Sportsman Society, which is BASS, and you just got, Bass. So explain the history and all the different names of Bass Nation, Bass Anglers Sportsman Society, all the same thing, right? So when did it start, and where are we? Where are we today?
Yeah, Bass Anglers Sportsman Society, BASS, was founded in 1968 by Ray Scott. And soon after that, he started Bassmaster magazine. So a lot of people think of us just as Bassmaster, but actually the Bassmaster name is what applies to the magazine and to our website, bassmaster.com. BASS, as it grew, part of that was developing these state chapters that I mentioned. And that name has changed a couple of times over the years. Way back, it used to be called the Bass Federation. And to be clear on that, each of these state chapters, Bass does not own them. They are their own independent 501c somethings that each state organizes, and they simply affiliate with BASS to make their anglers eligible to move up the ranks in tournaments and then have some of the benefits of working with the parent organization. So currently we call that the Bass Nation, but that encompasses 49 states and one Canadian province now that we have state or provincial, I guess you'd say, chapters in. And like I say, each one has a state conservation director that works on those local and state projects.
Yes. So, Gene, just a question about because as a membership organization, we work with a lot of nonprofit membership organizations. We see membership, and it'll go up, and then it'll sort of stagnate and flatten for a little while. And usually, those increases are driven by either excitement over a new opportunity or sport, or because there's a problem. So like Boone and Crockett, formed when there were no game species left. We'd basically decimated them. So, there was a crisis, so they formed, and others like turkeys and all that formed to do the same thing later on. But it seems like every time I turn the television on to an outdoor channel, there's bass fishing on now. So it's got to be, primarily the excitement of the sport. I know there's now high school bass angling clubs and tournaments, and it seems like it's growing exponentially. Is that what y'all are seeing?
Yes and no. First off, Bass is not a nonprofit. Bass is a for-profit company. It always has been. The membership portion was something that Ray Scott started way back in the day to sell subscriptions to the magazine, because that was the vehicle for driving revenue. Certainly that has grown over the years, and the tournaments, the television coverage, the live streaming, the websites. Bass, in a lot of ways, is a media company. In when you boil it down, the membership part of it has hovered around 500,000, give or take a few thousand over the years. I think they hit a peak back in the 70s of about 600,000. But that membership has been relatively stable for a number of years. And I think what we're seeing in terms of growth is a little bit misleading, because we have a lot of influence, a lot of kids coming in from high school fishing, college fishing, that people see that it's growing rapidly. But we're losing people on the other end as the baby boomer generation ages out and gets out of fishing. So the actual numbers of bass anglers in the U.S. is really not increasing all that much, because there's kind of that balance coming along where we've got the new ones, the young ones coming in, but we're losing them on the other end. So certainly our membership has been relatively stable. We're not seeing any declines in that sort of thing. But the other thing that I think makes it look like bass fishing is growing exponentially is that there is so much more coverage of it in the media, whether it's B.A.S.S. or MLF or, how many hundreds, literally, of podcasts, YouTube channels, that sort of thing that are out there right now that weren't there 15 years ago. And so it really makes it look like there's a whole lot more going on out there, when in fact I think a lot of it is just that there's a tremendous amount of more coverage of it and more exposure because of all these different media platforms that weren't available to us 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I get jealous just opening up my Instagram page and there'll be people out there fishing while I'm sitting inside working. But, so Bass has done, a lot with that membership and those membership dollars for conservation. And you guys have a conservation agenda that's made up of 5 or 6 parts. Let's talk a little bit about what that agenda includes.
Well, we came up with the idea for the agenda several years back, actually before my time as the conservation director at Bass. I was a state conservation director in Oklahoma for quite a number of years, actually. And we thought, we need to kind of focus on what are some of the key elements that affect the resource, and then how does that affect the sport of bass fishing? And so we came up with those half a dozen key points. One of them is scientific fishery management. We want to make sure that the state and federal agencies that are managing our aquatic resources are using the best science to do that, as opposed to what I used to call management by legislation, which is when politics gets involved and science goes out the window. So we encourage scientific fish management. There are a number of things. Fighting invasive species, these are not in particular order. Invasive species are a really big issue across the country. It's different critters or different plants in different places, but there are invasive species problems almost everywhere in the country that need to be addressed because they are threats to our aquatic resources. That sort of ties into habitat management. We really want to try to preserve and enhance fishery habitat where we can, because habitat, just like with any fish or game animal, habitat is kind of the key to having abundant populations, in our case of black bass. So habitat management and enhancement is something we really focus on a lot, especially our state and local chapters really get involved in a lot of local projects for that. That kind of ties in into things like aquatic plant management. Aquatic plant management is a hot button issue in a lot of states. It's part of that habitat, but it's almost grown to be its own animal out there. That there are some very divisive issues on the management of aquatic plants, and we try to help bring all the players to the table when those things come up, so that the anglers and the fishing community has a voice in the decision-making process on what's going to happen in terms of aquatic plant management. Another one is access. Fishing and boating access to public waters. There are a number of challenges to that around the country, whether it's because of privatization of what were used to be public water now. There are places where homeowners associations own the entire shoreline of around lakes, and there's no public access, even though the lake itself is public water. There are places that are being closed down to public access because of the threats to invasive species. There's things like that we're constantly trying to keep up with so that we can make sure that we want to be responsible stewards of the resource, but we want to allow people to have access to those resources so that they can enjoy the bass fishing that's in those lakes, rivers, ponds, reservoirs. And then the last point of our agenda is fish care. And it really boils down to ethical treatment of the animals, in this case the fish, and practicing the best possible ways to keep those fish healthy if they're going to be returned to the lake, whether it's in a tournament setting or if it's people that are just out fun fishing, and making sure that they're handling those fish properly and that we can maximize the survival of fish that are released, especially in our case after bass tournaments.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little more about that, because I know there are several, kind of big ticket issues out there on the fishing front, especially probably the tournament fishing front. Things that we didn't have 10 years ago, like live scan, side scanning, sonar. So there's improvements technologically being made, but there's a lot of improvements in how you handle fish from the time they come out of the water, they go back in too, from the way we used to do it. So what are some of the tips you've got for how to handle fish when you're going to put them back into the water?
Well, there's one of the things that we've found over the years through a lot of research that air exposure is a big key. You don't want to keep fish out of the water. We always tell people, don't keep them out of the water any longer than you can hold your breath, because the fish is holding its breath when it's out of water. We want to protect the slime coat on the fish, because that's kind of that slime on the outside of the fish is their first line of defense against infections and bacteria and diseases, that sort of thing. If you are going to keep the fish for food, which there's nothing wrong with that, and we don't want to promote the idea that catch and release is the answer in every case. There are times when keeping and harvesting fish is a good thing. If you're going to keep the fish, then obviously putting them in a live well or in a cooler with ice, that sort of thing, is the way to go. If you plan on releasing that fish, then handling that as quickly and as little as possible is a really important key. Now, in bass tournaments, it gets a lot more complicated, because typically those fish are going into a live well for some period of time, perhaps 5, 6, 8 hours, before those fish are weighed and then subsequently released. And so the anglers have a lot of responsibility about what they need to be doing in terms of managing that live well. And we found that there's really two keys to that whole process. One of them is obviously oxygen. The fish have to have plenty of oxygen, and so that means running the aeration systems pretty much all the time rather than on these timers, so that you can maximize oxygen. And the second key is temperature. We found that moderating the temperature in the live well is really important. Now, in the spring or in the fall, when the water temperatures are cool, you can simply pump water through the live well and the fish will be happy. It's in the summertime, when we get much more critical conditions, hotter weather, hotter water, that we have to be a lot more conscientious. And it can't be just add water, insert fish, flip a switch, and forget about it, because things go wrong. So that's where we have a whole protocol on the Bassmaster.com website called Keeping Bass Alive. That's the short term for it. If you go to Bassmaster.com and in the search bar just type in Keeping Bass Alive, it'll bring up the tips that we have put together over the years that have been scientifically tested and proven to be effective in helping maximize the survival of those fish that are going to be released after a tournament. So that's, in a nutshell, that Keeping Bass Alive protocol is what we've found in over 20 plus years that we've been using it to be very effective in helping keep fish healthy for release after bass tournaments.
Yeah, that is a great resource. I think 6-7 pages or whatnot. A lot of great tips on there. So Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation, we were started off in Connecticut, and we're friends with Alex Weatherall, who's currently a Bassmaster elite guy, and I got to go out on his fancy boat and his fancy equipment and actually catch some fish that I didn't know were even in the middle of a lake. But we were out there on a hot summer day, and he brought, I don't know, 30 pounds of ice with him, and just to keep, even just to have them in there for a little while, to keep the bass at the right temperature, and take some quick photos and let them go. So I thought that was really cool tip, bringing ice with you. And then the second thing he talked about, and I don't know much about it, maybe you can explain it, is sometimes smallmouth are in deep water, and bringing them up quick, they something called fizzing. I think we talked about it once before on the show, but talk a little bit about what fizzing is and the need for it and when it comes into play.
Okay. When fish are caught from deep water and brought to the surface, fish have inside them, they have an organ that's called the swim bladder. And it's basically a little gas-filled sac that allows them to regulate their depth. And that allows them to suspend without putting in a lot of energy. Well, you think of a balloon, if you've got a balloon 30 feet deep and it's got a little bit of air in it, when you bring it to the surface, the water pressure is so much less that balloon expands. And that's the same thing that happens to the swim bladder with inside the fish. And bass can't burp, so there's no way for this gas that has expanded to get out. And so the fish floats around on the surface of the water. And it can be to a point where that expansion is so great that the fish can't swim back down on their own, even to the depth where they need the water pressure to compress that swim bladder. So through a lot of research, what's been devised is what we call fizzing. It's F-I-Z-Z-I-N-G, fizzing. And it's where you take a hypodermic needle, and basically you're going to stick it into the side of the fish, through the muscle and the skin, into that swim bladder, and let some of the gas come out to where that fish then retains a neutral buoyancy and is able to then swim back down to the correct depth. And there's been some research done that shows, people worry about, oh my gosh, I can't stick a needle in the fish. It heals up amazingly quickly. It allows that fish to swim back down. When it's not done properly, or when it's not done at all, those fish float around on the surface, and they're pretty much doomed. So fizzing is something that we encourage anglers to learn how to do. There's a number of really good videos out on the websites. The very best one by far is one called Fizzing Smallmouth Bass on our Bassmaster.com website, where one of our state chapter conservation directors, Barb Elliott, goes through the whole process. She explains the problem, and then she very meticulously describes the process. And once anglers learn how to do that, it can be a life-saving technique for the fish that they catch out of deep water.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've not done it with freshwater fish before, but saltwater fish, you commonly see bottom fish, well, that swim bladder actually expand to the point it comes out of their mouth. If you're pulling a grouper off the bottom from 300 or 400 feet, and it's an interesting comparison. But it does the same thing with humans. I'm a scuba diver, and the first thing they teach you scuba diving is when you're inhaling air at depth, you don't ascend to the surface and with your breath, because your lungs expand and you'll do permanent damage. So you got to exhale the whole way up, but a fish can't do that. So you have to help them with it. So another question related to fish health that I've often wondered about. I'm a deer biologist by training, but when I was a director in Kentucky, one of the more contentious tournament issues we had was with muskie tournaments, and it had to do with lifting them vertically because of the weight of the fish. And we pushed through some regulations to where they're supposed to support them basically horizontally. Does that happen with the bigger bass, or is that not as much of a concern because of the size difference?
No, it is a concern. More so, holding bigger bass with two hands is we always recommend that. But it's not so much because of the internal organs. as most people hold the bass by the lower jaw. You grip it with your thumb and you hold it. But if the fish is really big and really heavy, that puts a tremendous amount of strain on the jaws and the ligaments that are around its mouth. And so in lieu of that, we always recommend a second hand under the belly of the fish to help support the fish. So we're not putting so much of a strain on the mouth and the mouth parts, because ultimately if that jaw gets broken or strained or stretched, that fish may not be able to breathe or feed as effectively, or it may take a while for it to kind of recover from that. So that two-handed hold is something we recommend for, bass that are over 6 pounds or so, that sort of kind of somewhere in that range.
Not that I've ever had to worry about it.
Yeah.
I've caught one that big.
Me neither. I was like, okay, problem solved. Just catch the small ones. I'm good at that. But one of the things I did at a local Newtown Fish and Game, we had a lake that we tried to manage. We put in fish structures, and they were like wooden, I want to say pyramids, kind of. What type of habitat work does Bass do?
We have a grant program. Bass corporate wise, we don't do the projects. We let our state chapters, the Bass Nation clubs and chapters, do that work. We have a grant program that's sponsored by AFTCO that we provide money to selected projects around the country. A lot of it is sinking brush piles. Some of it is using artificial structures, whether it's these mossback fish attractors, or there's a lot of homemade kind of DIY type plastic structures that are out there now that we found to be inert, so they're not contributing to microplastics and all that stuff people hear about. There are a few of our projects where we're actually getting folks out to plant aquatic plants, native aquatic plants, to try to help restore that vegetation, which is so critical in especially for nursery areas for small bass. So those are the kind of things that our state chapters and the local bass clubs are working on.
Very cool. You mentioned AFTCO, one of my favorite programs, and actually Outdoor Stewards has a similar program called Fill a Bag While Filling Your Tag, where we distribute reusable, biodegradable bags to anglers and hunters across the nation. They clean up the environment. But you guys have been doing this way longer than I have with your, it's a bank bag, or you work with the fans and the pro anglers to clean up the shorelines, I think, too, right?
Yeah, we try to get our high school teams, anybody, try to make it a community project to get out and do lake cleanups. We try to tag them along with some of our tournament events to get people out there. AFTCO will provide their bright yellow bank bags free of charge, and they'll even provide AFTCO gift cards as a little thank you to all of the folks that come out to help. And so we try to rally the kids, especially the high school kids, kind of get them tuned in to the idea of leaving it better than you found it. And so we encourage those kind of cleanup projects around the country. And some of our state chapters have adopted programs where if the kids don't participate in these programs, they don't get to fish in the local tournaments. So it's kind of an incentive for them to get out there and help pick up trash.
Well, that's awesome. Getting kids involved is seems like it's more and more of a difficult process in outdoor activities these days than it used to be. A lot of us grew up doing this stuff, and now kids are so tied to their screens and computers and iPhones and iPads that they think that's fishing, playing a fishing app on their phone. And do you put a real fish on a hook and they see what it's really like? I think it makes a heck of a difference. And
one of the things that I want to, as we talk about this, that I want to make sure, just what you said, the kids are tuned in to their iPhones or their pads or YouTube or whatever. That's the next step in educating the youth. Is they don't read books, they don't read magazines, they very seldom go to websites. So one of the things that we're really going to start trying to do is push more of our content out on video and on YouTube to help educate those kids on conservation, fish care, all of those things that are part of our conservation agenda.
Well, you mentioned, that's a good segue into telling us where we can find more information on all things Bass, Bass Nation, Bassmaster, the websites, the YouTube channel, the social media channel. Tell us where we can find more information, some of the stuff that we talked about today.
Our primary source is Bassmaster.com. That is our website that houses the majority of our conservation content at this point. I think as we grow and learn more and get more content on video, we will utilize the Bassmaster YouTube channel a lot more. Certainly social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, we're trying to push more of that content out through those social media channels. But Bassmaster.com is the first place to go to look to find that information, and then it branches out from there.
Yeah, and I think the Instagram page is Bass_Nation. Like I said, I get jealous just opening up and watching everybody else catch them fish. But I get to talk to great guys like you, and on the Connecting with Conservation podcast, we get to inform everybody about all the things going on, whether it's bass fishing conservation or clean up the environment or hunting. As we've talked about over and over, hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters are conservationists, and they want to manage for great wildlife populations individually, and then organizations like Bass. We appreciate what you're doing, Gene. Appreciate you coming on, and unless you have any final tips on how to catch that 6-pounder so I can use two hands, we'll let you give us the final word, and John will wrap it up.
Once again, if you want tips on how to catch them, Bassmaster.com's got a lot of that too. There's a lot of information in the how-to sections, and you can find out just a world of information there. And of course, Bassmaster Magazine, the old guard, the OG of bass fishing publications, is still going strong.
Well, Gene, I've told him he's just not holding his mouth right when he fishes. That's what's causing that. So, but thank you for coming on today. It's been very informative. It's good to meet you. And thanks for taking care of not just the fish and their habitats, but the people that enjoy them. That's an important part of what we believe in, what we do. And just thanks for spending some time with us today, and look forward to talking to you in the future. To our listeners and to our people who watch our videos, please continue to watch them. If you like these, subscribe to them. That helps us and helps you as well. You'll get notices when they're going to drop every week. And also like them. That also helps us as well. So tell your friends about us. Tell your friends about Bassmaster. Visit the website. Great tips there. We appreciate everything you do, and we'll see you in the woods or on the water. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.